My name is Priya Mehta, and I'm writing this from my cubicle at a tech company in Boston where I've worked as a senior software engineer for 6 years, watching less qualified colleagues with American accents get promoted to leadership positions while I'm repeatedly told that my communication style needs improvement before I can advance. Which is corporate code for the fact that my Indian accent makes decision makers uncomfortable despite my MIT master's degree, 12 years of professional experience, and technical expertise that exceeds most of the managers who now supervise my work. At 34, I've calculated that my accent has cost me approximately $500,000 in lost earnings through missed promotions, denied client-facing opportunities, and salary negotiations where my voice was literally worth less than identical words spoken with an American accent, creating a systematic penalty that I pay every single day simply for being an immigrant who learned English as my third language after Hindi and Gujarati. The accent discrimination began on my very first day at my first job after graduating from MIT, when my manager introduced me to the team and immediately made a joke about needing subtitles for my presentations, establishing from that moment that my voice would be treated as a problem to be managed rather than an asset bringing diverse perspective and global experience to the organization. The comment was framed as friendly humor rather than bias, making it impossible to object without seeming overly sensitive or lacking the thick skin supposedly required for professional success in American workplaces. The constant repetition requests became the most exhausting aspect of every workday, as colleagues would ask me to repeat myself multiple times in meetings, video calls, and casual conversations, treating my accent as a comprehension barrier even when I was speaking clearly and using precise technical language. What made this particularly frustrating was watching those same colleagues easily understand British accents, Australian accents, and regional American accents without requesting clarification, revealing that the comprehension problem wasn't actually about my clarity, but about their unconscious association of Indian accents with foreignness and lesser intelligence. The meeting exclusion started subtly when I noticed that I was being invited to fewer client calls and stakeholder presentations despite having the strongest technical background on my team. When I asked my manager about the pattern, he explained that the company wanted to put our best communicators in front of clients, language that sounded neutral but actually meant people with American accents who wouldn't require clients to adjust to different speech patterns. The implication was clear: my technical excellence was valuable for back-end work, but my voice was considered a liability in situations that affected the company's image and business development. The leadership barrier became explicit during my first attempt at promotion to team lead when the hiring committee feedback included concerns about my communication effectiveness and executive presence, despite the fact that I had been successfully mentoring junior engineers, leading technical initiatives, and presenting at industry conferences for years. When I pressed for specific examples of communication problems, the feedback was vague and subjective, focusing on perceptions about my confidence and clarity rather than any actual failures in my ability to convey technical information or lead project teams. The microphone trauma developed during virtual meetings where I discovered that colleagues would talk over me more frequently than they interrupted native English speakers, as if my accent signaled that my contributions were less important or could be dismissed more easily. I started experiencing anxiety before every video call, obsessing over pronunciation and speaking more slowly to ensure clarity, which paradoxically made me sound less confident and reinforced the perception that I wasn't leadership material because my voice didn't project the effortless authority that came naturally to people speaking in their native accent. The accent reduction pressure began when HR recommended that I attend professional communication workshops to enhance my presentation skills, which turned out to be thinly disguised accent modification classes where immigrants were taught to flatten their speech patterns and adopt American pronunciation to sound more professional. The classes cost $1,500 that I paid myself, and the entire experience was psychologically damaging because it reinforced the message that my authentic voice was inadequate and needed to be erased to succeed in American professional environments. The comparison pain was constant as I watched colleagues with identical educational backgrounds and less impressive work performance get promoted ahead of me based primarily on their ability to communicate effectively with stakeholders, which really meant speaking English with an American accent that didn't require any adjustment from listeners. One particularly painful promotion went to a colleague who had joined the company 2 years after me, had a bachelor's degree from a state school compared to my MIT master's, but spoke with a Midwestern American accent that apparently compensated for his inferior technical qualifications and shorter tenure. The client-facing rejection was explicitly stated during a business development opportunity when I was told that the company preferred to send native speakers to pitch new clients because first impressions mattered, and they didn't want to risk clients being distracted by accent differences instead of focusing on our technical capabilities. The casual way, this linguistic discrimination was presented as reasonable business strategy rather than prejudice revealed how normalized accent bias had become in corporate decision-making processes. The salary negotiation disadvantage became apparent when I discovered through informal conversations that colleagues in similar roles were earning 15 to 20% more than me despite comparable or inferior qualifications and performance. When I researched salary negotiation strategies, I learned that people with foreign accents are systematically offered lower starting salaries and receive smaller raises because they're perceived as having fewer options and less confidence in demanding fair compensation, creating a wage gap that compounds over entire careers. The social isolation deepened as I realized that my accent affected not just professional opportunities, but also workplace relationships and informal networking that often determined career advancement more than formal qualifications. Colleagues were less likely to include me in casual conversations, after-work socializing, and informal mentoring relationships that built trust and opened doors to opportunities, creating a subtle but powerful exclusion from the social capital that actually drove career success in American corporate environments. The family pressure added complexity as my parents in India couldn't understand why I was struggling professionally despite my prestigious education and technical expertise, viewing my MIT degree as a guarantee of American success that should have transcended any language barriers. When I tried to explain how accent discrimination was limiting my career, they suggested I was being too sensitive or not working hard enough, unable to comprehend how systematically American workplaces penalized foreign voices regardless of the qualifications and work ethic of the people speaking. The identity crisis intensified as I began to hate the sound of my own voice and feel shame about my accent, which represented not just my Indian heritage, but also my parents' sacrifices to educate me and my journey across the world to pursue career opportunities. The pressure to modify my accent felt like betraying my cultural identity and family history, but the professional costs of maintaining my authentic voice seemed increasingly unsustainable as I watched my career stagnate while less qualified American accented colleagues advanced past me. The breaking point came during my third failed promotion attempt when a junior colleague with an American accent was promoted to the team lead position I had been pursuing, and the feedback I received focused entirely on communication style, concerns without acknowledging my superior technical skills, longer tenure, successful project leadership, or the mentorship I had provided to half the current team. That night, I sat in my car in the company parking lot and cried, feeling that no amount of education or expertise would ever compensate for the fundamental flaw of speaking English with an Indian accent in American professional spaces. The mental health crisis that followed included depression related to chronic professional rejection, anxiety about speaking in meetings and presentations, and a developing trauma response to workplace communication that should have been routine and energizing rather than sources of constant stress. I started avoiding optional meetings, declining speaking opportunities, and withdrawing from professional engagement that might have advanced my career because the psychological cost of repeatedly having my voice devalued and dismissed had become unbearable. The therapy that began during my crisis was with Dr. Lisa Chen, an Asian American psychologist who specialized in treating immigrants and first-generation professionals dealing with workplace discrimination and identity-related stress. She helped me understand that my experiences were manifestations of systematic linguistic discrimination rather than personal failures of communication or confidence, and that the accent tax I was paying represented a form of workplace bias that was as real and damaging as more overt forms of discrimination. Accent discrimination is one of the last socially acceptable forms of prejudice in American workplaces, Dr. Chin explained during one of our sessions. People who would never make overtly racist comments feel comfortable criticizing accents or suggesting that foreign speech patterns indicate lesser intelligence or professionalism. The bias is so normalized that even well-meaning colleagues don't recognize how their reactions to accents create systematic barriers for immigrants who are completely fluent in English but speak it with different pronunciation patterns. She helped me understand that the constant requests for repetition often had less to do with actual comprehension difficulties and more to do with listener effort and unconscious associations between accents and competence. Research shows that people can understand accented speech perfectly well when they're motivated to pay attention. But in workplace contexts where attention is divided and effort is minimized, listeners are more likely to claim comprehension problems with foreign accents even when the speech is objectively clear and grammatically correct. The reframing work involved learning to distinguish between legitimate communication improvements and discriminatory demands that I modify fundamental aspects of my speech to accommodate others' biases. Dr. Chun helped me develop strategies for responding to accent-based criticism by redirecting focus to the content of my communication rather than accepting the premise that my pronunciation was a problem requiring correction, shifting the burden back to listeners to engage with what I was actually saying rather than fixating on how I was saying it. The documentation practice that emerged from therapy involved keeping detailed records of instances where accent discrimination affected my professional opportunities, including specific feedback about communication concerns, comparisons with American accented colleagues' advancement, and patterns of exclusion from client-facing roles despite equal or superior qualifications. The documentation served multiple purposes, validating my experiences, identifying systematic patterns rather than isolated incidents, and creating evidence that could support formal complaints if I chose to pursue legal or HR remedies. The advocacy development began when I connected with other immigrant professionals through organizations like South Asian Americans Leading Together, SALT, and Ascend, where I discovered that my experiences with accent discrimination were nearly universal among first-generation professionals despite variations in technical fields, geographic locations, and specific cultural backgrounds. The shared experiences validated that accent bias was a systematic problem rather than a reflection of individual communication deficiencies, and the collective advocacy provided strategies for challenging linguistic discrimination that were more effective than individual responses. The policy research revealed that some progressive companies were implementing accent bias training that educated managers and hiring committees about linguistic discrimination and the ways that accent-based judgments reflected prejudice rather than legitimate assessment of communication effectiveness. I began advocating for similar training at my own company, working with HR and diversity teams to develop programs that would address accent discrimination as a form of workplace bias requiring institutional intervention rather than individual accommodation by immigrants. The legal consultation provided information about my rights under employment discrimination law, including the fact that accent-based employment decisions violate Title VII of the Civil Rights Act unless employers can demonstrate that specific pronunciation patterns materially interfere with job performance. The legal framework helped me understand that requests for accent modification or promotion denials based on communication style concerns were potentially unlawful unless directly related to job requirements, shifting my perspective from viewing accent discrimination as an unfortunate reality I had to accept to recognizing it as a legal bias I could challenge. The boundary-setting strategies included developing confident responses to repetition requests, such as asking colleagues to specify what they didn't understand rather than automatically repeating myself, and redirecting conversations that focused on my accent to discussions about the substance of my technical contributions. I practiced assertively declining suggestions for accent reduction classes while offering to work on any specific communication challenges that were directly related to job performance rather than general discomfort with foreign speech patterns. The ally cultivation involved identifying colleagues and managers who valued diverse perspectives and could serve as advocates for more inclusive communication norms in our workplace. I worked to educate supportive colleagues about accent bias and the ways they could interrupt linguistic discrimination by explicitly valuing diverse voices, challenging assumptions that accents indicate lesser competence, and ensuring that promotion decisions focused on actual performance rather than subjective communication assessments. The career transition eventually included moving to a tech company with stronger diversity commitments and more international leadership representation, where my accent was viewed as an asset reflecting global perspective rather than a liability requiring correction. The new environment wasn't perfect, but the organizational culture explicitly valued linguistic diversity and had implemented training programs to address accent bias, creating conditions where my technical expertise could be evaluated fairly without being overshadowed by pronunciation-based prejudice. The speaking and consulting work that emerged from my experience includes presentations at diversity conferences about linguistic discrimination and strategies for creating more inclusive workplace communication cultures. I share my story to help other immigrants understand that accent-based career obstacles reflect systematic bias rather than personal communication failures, and to help companies recognize how linguistic discrimination limits their ability to leverage the full talents of their increasingly diverse workforces. The mentorship relationships I've developed focus on supporting other immigrant professionals who are experiencing accent discrimination and need validation that their experiences are real and their voices are valuable regardless of pronunciation patterns. I work to help men develop confidence in their authentic communication styles while also strategically navigating workplace environments that may not yet fully value linguistic diversity. Today, I continue working as a senior engineer while also serving on diversity advisory boards focused on addressing accent bias and linguistic discrimination in technology companies. The work allows me to leverage my technical expertise while also creating systematic change that could prevent other immigrants from paying the same accent tax that cost me years of professional advancement and significant financial opportunity. The research engagement includes collaborating with linguists and organizational psychologists studying accent discrimination and developing evidence-based interventions to reduce bias in hiring, promotion, and performance evaluation processes. The academic partnership helps translate personal experiences into systematic understanding of how linguistic prejudice operates in professional contexts and what institutional changes are most effective at creating genuine inclusion for diverse voices. Key resources and solutions that made the difference. Professional therapy with culturally competent providers who understand immigrant experiences helps process workplace trauma related to linguistic discrimination and develop healthy responses to accent bias. Organizations like South Asian Americans Leading Together, SALT, Ascend, and other immigrant professional networks provide peer support, advocacy resources, and collective strategies for challenging accent discrimination. Legal consultation services inform immigrants about their rights under employment discrimination law and the circumstances under which accent-based employment decisions constitute a legal bias. Accent bias training programs for managers and hiring committees educate decision-makers about linguistic discrimination and strategies for evaluating communication effectiveness without prejudice toward foreign speech patterns. Documentation practices help establish patterns of accent-based discrimination that can support formal complaints or legal action when workplace advancement is systematically denied based on pronunciation rather than performance. Ally cultivation strategies identify supportive colleagues who can advocate for inclusive communication norms and challenge accent-based assumptions about competence and professionalism. Workplace diversity initiatives that explicitly address linguistic discrimination create organizational cultures where diverse voices are valued rather than penalized. Research on accent bias and communication effectiveness provides evidence-based frameworks for distinguishing legitimate job requirements from discriminatory preferences for native pronunciation. Today, when I meet other immigrants who are struggling with accent discrimination and wondering whether they should invest in accent reduction, I tell them that their voices are valuable exactly as they are, and that systematic change requires challenging the bias rather than accepting the burden of modifying ourselves to accommodate others' prejudice. The accent tax is real, and the professional costs are significant, but the solution isn't erasing our authentic voices. It's building workplace cultures that genuinely value the linguistic diversity that reflects our increasingly global professional environments.